Nope, okay.
Good.
Okay, so today we're kind of going backwards. We're going to cover Chapter 9 on renewable energy. Because of how well of a job that Tony Bonata did, some of it is going to be a repeat, but that's all right because it'll prepare you better for the quiz and for the final. So this is a really good quote by Morris Strong. Typical citizens of advanced industrialized nations such as the U.S. each consume as much energy in 6 months as a typical citizen in less developed countries consume in their entire life. That's pretty remarkable, okay? So we're going to talk about the non-renewable energy, and more specifically right now we're going to talk about this concept of net energy, okay? So we've talked about solar energy and how that is really making huge advances, especially as Tony mentioned within the last 5 years. And with those advances, the cost has been coming down, making it much more affordable for us. But when it comes to commercial energy, unfortunately, most of that energy is from non-renewable sources, such as fossil fuels, okay? So this diagram here is showing you all the different ways we get these non-renewable sources. Now realize things such as coal and natural gas, they do renew themselves, but because of the time it takes, that lifespan, it's considered non-renewable. These are things that takes, hundreds and thousands of years in order for it to be renewed. So that's why it's considered as non-renewable, okay? So this diagram, Tony already had some slides of this nature, but just to recap on it, here it's showing you the energy sources for the world, and on the right is for the U.S. And there's a lot of correlation, direct correlation going on here. Coal for the world is 22%, coal for the U.S. is 23%. Oil, 33% for the world, 39% for the U.S. Not that much more, but a little bit. Natural gas is almost the same, 21% for the world, 23% for the U.S. Where it really comes into play is if you look into this green portion here being the renewables. As far as the world is concerned, 18% of all energy comes from renewables. For the world, or for the U.S., that's only 8%, less than half compared to the world. But as Tony mentioned last week, that whole dynamics is changing, okay? Specifically when we get into the solar, not so much into the hydro, because as he said, everything's already dammed up, so we can't get more energy out of that. But it's really coming into play with the solar, and what else? What was the other category of renewable? The wind. Okay, so what we're going to see happening year after year at this point is this little pie, these two little pie pieces are going to expand. Okay, and so what area do you think is going to give as a result for the non-renewables? What parts do you think is going to shrink down? The oil and the coal. Unfortunately, and I'll explain in a few slides why I'm saying unfortunately, natural gas, that is going up, but there's some major repercussions with that. Okay, so according to the second law of thermodynamics, okay, basically, it takes energy to get energy, kind of like what I put in here. It takes money to make money. Okay, you can't start off with anything, even if it's just $100 to start your business. You still had to have some money to get that business up and going. Okay, so you have to have energy in order to get energy. And what happens is, when you're talking about this high quality energy, there's some waste involved. It's inevitable. So every time you go up this step, okay, you're losing energy as a result. Okay, so net energy, think about if you guys have a job, are you more interested in your gross income or your net income? Your net pay or your gross pay? It's your net. Okay, that's what you're actually taking home. And that's the same concept here with energy, that net energy yield. So what it is, it's the total amount of energy available from an energy source minus all these things. The energy that was taken to find the source, okay, to extract that energy, to process it, and to get it to us. So there's a lot being lost there. from the time that, it takes energy just to find these sources. And with technology, okay, we're able to find these sources easier, okay? But still, that is part of the process. And what happens is we have this energy return on net investment. That's what we're concerned about. How much are we actually have at the end in order to use? So this diagram, 9.3, taken straight out of your book, is 2 different categories here. Oh, I guess they are going to log on. Mr. Slee,
Okay.
they are going to log on.
Okay.
Oh, that's Granite. No, that is Lewis Center. Okay.
As soon as they get on there a little bit.
Okay. So these 2 categories here focus on which types of energy is giving us that high net energy yield. That's what we're most interested in. Why are we interested in these other ones that aren't really giving us, the most bang for our buck? Well, look at where solar is. It says low to medium, okay? But this is changing with the efficiency. When solar first came out, high prices, and it really wasn't all that efficient as far as capturing the sun's energy and converting it into our usable energy. But that's changing, okay? As far as heating, okay, we have what Neville talked about to you guys before, and Tony, this passive solar. We have natural gas, geothermal, and oil. Those are the main ways that we rely on as far as heating, unlike what we have today. Then we have this here showing you as far as the high temperature industrial heat, okay, coal. We get a lot of energy with our coal, and then transportation. And I think Tony mentioned this in his, I don't know, maybe he didn't, I don't remember. But just this past week, something really major happened with Tesla. You guys know what that was? They have now, Tesla has made a, I forgot what it's called, guys. A semi-truck, thank you. I know you and Tony were talking about it. So Tesla has now made a semi-truck, which is way cool. Now, granted, what Tony was explaining is he feels that's more for short distances, not these long distances. Oh,
That's all right.
okay. But still, that's a big thing. So when you're going from one distribution plant to the next, this is the way that is going to be the wave of the future.
I'm just going to dive in here. Mr. Huffan and Lewis Center, good to see you guys. We're going to give the lecture, and then Lyn's going to have some time to ask questions at the end. So be thinking about your questions. We really want to make it interactive from here on out. And I think that's it. I think just to let them know, we started early because the first part is about energy efficiency, and we've already talked about that in 2 other lectures. So don't feel like you've missed anything just yet. Thank you.
All right, so we heavily depend on oil, especially with this crude oil. Okay, it comes in different grades. We have this conventional or light. It takes a lot of energy to extract that. If you guys ever go along the coast, off of Ventura County and Santa Barbara, you'll see these oil rigs. Okay, so it happens here within California. In order for that oil to be usable, there's a lot of refinery that takes place. So with the oil, what's kind of cool about it is there's a lot of different products that we can get from that crude oil. Okay, anything from your grease and waxes, diesel oil, aviation fuel, all the way to gases. So depending on how refined it is, there's all these different products that we can get from it. But the thing is, we're running out of it. Okay, again, this is non-renewable. Yeah, it regenerates, but it's not within our lifetime by any stretch of the imagination. So these deposits, okay, with technology, we're able to identify where these deposits are located. And there's this organization with these countries that basically 72% of the world's crude oil comes from these reserves. Venezuela is responsible for 18%, and then Saudi Arabia is for 16%. Okay, they hold the majority as far as the world is concerned. The U.S. only holds 9%, okay, of the oil, but yet we use 21%. Okay? You got it wrong. Oh, we'll have to look at that. Really? Well, we'll look at that. Okay. So what this is showing you is throughout, as time goes on, basically it's projected that oil consumption is just going to increase. However, it really wasn't a topic of this past election, but it has in the past, is this Arctic refuge oil. Okay? There is a deposit that was found. It actually isn't really all that much. It might help supply us for about 50 years. Okay? So why would we even want to tap into that if it's only going to supply us for 50 years? Why even consider it? Well, then we're less dependent on these other countries. Okay? Because like what Tony said last week, why did we go to war? One of the big ones is over oil. So if we can find these oil deposits within our area, then we don't have to rely on other countries. But where these oil deposits are, this is basically untamed area by man. Okay, one of the last touch areas. And this is where your polar bears are, and we already know that that's a big problem because due to the polar, the ice that floats, okay, they're not able to hunt as easily as they used to be. So we're adding this into the picture as well. So there's different advantages and disadvantages when it comes to using the oil, okay? It wasn't all that long ago. I think it was in the Gulf. Okay, we've had these oil spills, these platforms, we've had one explode, and then we have huge oil spill. Okay, it's a big problem on the wildlife then. Okay, some can be cleaned up, but the amount that gets spilled compared to what is cleaned up is pretty minimal, unfortunately. So that has to be taken in consideration. So we come up with newer technologies, okay? And the one that Neville was starting to talk about is this one called hydraulic fracturing, okay? Or we call it fracking. And so there's some real serious concern about this. This is one of those hot topics that came up on this last election is, do we continue to frack for natural gas? Some people are, yeah, it's there, so let's use it. And other people are, no, there's some real serious consequences to it. So Neville, can you put up the YouTube video? Okay, so it's just like a 2.5-minute video, YouTube video. It's from a documentary called Gas Lamp, which is about an 1.5-hour documentary if you're actually interested in watching it. But this will give you an idea of what this whole fracking is about.
In 2006, filmmaker Josh Fox received a letter in the mail offering him $100,000 for permission to drill for natural gas on his land. He knew that in 2005, Congress had passed a bill exempting gas companies from environmental regulations. He wanted to know what impact the drilling would have on his land, so he took his camera across the United States.
Okay, we're gonna set that.
In 2006, filmmaker Josh Fox received a letter in the mail offering him $100,000 for permission to drill for natural gas on his land. He knew that in 2005, Congress had passed a bill exempting gas companies from environmental regulations. He wanted to know what impact the drilling would have on his land, so he took his camera across the United States to discover the truth about hydraulic fracturing.
The method of gas drilling they use is called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. It blasts a mix of water and chemicals 8,000 feet into the ground. The fracking itself is like a mini earthquake. The intense pressure breaks apart the rock and frees up the gas.
6 states have documented over 1,000 incidents of groundwater contamination.
It bubbles and hisses when it comes out. I won't drink it.
They can drill whether we like it or not.
It's a free-for-all.
Our water was good before they started drilling, and when they got done, it was bad.
Obviously, we have a problem here.
The Colorado Oil and Gas Commission is aware of the situation and will probably be doing some additional testing in the area as soon as possible.
There has been concern raised about the methods to tap these valuable resources. have been characterized as environmentally risky and inadequately regulated. Such reports are not accurate.
The neurological effects are very insidious.
Everybody was sick, including me. I have these lesions in my brain.
You get pains all over your body.
If you weren't able to do this hydraulic fracturing, how much more would we be dependent on foreign oil and terrorism?
I have one quote here from you that says that you're trying to do this in a way that doesn't damage the environment. But you also said recently that water contamination is inevitable.
Well, yeah, I mean...
are those contradictory, or...?
Despite documented health risks and environmental impact, hydraulic fracturing is spreading across the globe.
It's amazing that what took Mother Nature millions of years to build can be destroyed in a few hours with a piece of heavy machinery.
What it's doing is searching for a problem that does not exist.
Whoa, Jesus Christ.
It's not supposed to do that.
All right, so I don't know if you noticed, because I went through it pretty quickly, but it was given a list of chemicals. And that list of chemicals, like over hundreds of chemicals, are used for this process. And what's happening, it showed you that drill going down vertically, then horizontally. And what happens is those chemicals are getting into our aquifers, and that's where...
I'm not a pessimist.
Oh, it didn't
I've always
stop.
had a great deal of faith in people, that we wouldn't succumb to frenzy or rage or greed, that we figure out a solution without destroying the things that we love.
The Subcommittee on Energy and Minerals will now come to order.
There we go. Got it? Okay. So those chemicals, again, a whole list of these, hundreds of chemicals that are used for this process. Those chemicals then get into our water supply, and then we're consuming it. I don't know if you caught on too, as far as that one guy had a lighter to the faucet, and as the water finally came out of his faucet, it was flammable. Okay, and so that's due to the chemicals that are used for this fracking process. If you notice, one of those, I guess they're having like some sort of console going on. And again, why are we doing this? So we're not dependent on other countries. Okay, but it's some scary stuff. I do encourage you, maybe watch a couple more of those trailers or watch other YouTube videos that explain it more. But it's highly controversial, and this was one of those environmental hot topics that was of issue this past election. All right, so another is oil shale, and what we get what's called kerogen out of it. And what can happen is this kerogen basically can be made into liquid petroleum and natural gas. So it's an alternative. What happens is it has to be distilled, okay? And basically it's made from shale. It's a type of sedimentary rock, so it gets trapped is what happens, okay? But the problem is, yeah, it's a type of energy, but we're getting low yield out of it. So again, that whole bang for your buck, we're really not getting much energy out of this whole process. It's structurally similar to petroleum, so it can be used as a substitute. It's really inexpensive, but yet it's very expensive in order to harvest it, in order to extract it. Okay, so for many reasons, just within that one slide right there, it's not sustainable. So when we talk about these heavy oils from oil shale and tar sand, this tar sand does occur naturally in Santa Barbara and Ventura County. You'll be walking along and you see these globs of tar. And for the longest time, like, what the heck is all this about? Well, naturally, there's natural seeps. If you guys ever been to Los Angeles, there's the La Brea tar pits. So there's natural tar that does seep in the area. But with that, again, it's low energy, okay? So then we get to the natural gas. That's that whole fracking process in order to get the natural gas. The thing with it, we use these pipelines in order to distribute it. These pipelines are either within states or they go from state to state, okay? And there's different types. There's this liquefied petroleum gas, and then there's liquefied natural gas. But with that is low energy. So the largest natural gas producers, United States 20%, Russia 19%, and Canada 5%. Unconventional natural gas, we have coal bed, okay, and then we have this methane hydrate. So this slide here is a diagram showing you intrastate and interstate pipelines. So there's a lot of pipelines that stay within California itself, not too many that go out of the state, but that's not the norm. If you look here, look at all those pipelines that interconnect from state to state. Okay, so this is pretty, and this was as of 2013. So there's these advantages using the natural gas. A big one is it's emitting less carbon dioxide. So that's good, okay? But in order to get that, again, you have to do that fracking practice, and that energy is considered low yield, okay? So with your natural gas, okay, again, it's just showing you more advantages and disadvantages with that. A huge disadvantage is those pipelines. Nearly 1/4 of all the energy used in the U.S. is due to natural gas. Trying not to get distracted. So this diagram here is, this again, was a big controversy right before the election. You guys probably heard about it. It's called the Dakota Access Pipeline, DAPL, otherwise known as the Bakken Pipeline. And so this is one of those pipelines that goes from, doesn't stay within just one state, but it goes all the way from North Dakota all the way to Illinois. So where was all the controversy about? Because, you know, we go back here, what's the controversy? We have all these pipelines, so what's one more pipeline? So where was the controversy about this one? Go ahead.
Like the river, and then it was supposed to go back the river again twice. It could have avoided for the whole time.
It wasn't so much. It really doesn't. From what I saw, it really doesn't go into the Navajo or the Sioux reservation. It goes right along it, but the problem was how it goes along the river. And in the event that pipeline ruptures, that's their drinking water. Now, I think there was also, it's not necessarily on the reservation, but it was found that there's these sacred burial grounds right along that pipeline as well. So it was in construction for quite some time. George?
Recently there was an spill on the pipeline.
What was that?
Recently there was an actual spill on the pipeline.
Yeah, how long ago did that occur? Oh, it was a different, but it was within the area. I mean, anytime you have a pipeline, there is that possibility that there's going to be leaks and ruptures, okay? So this is where all the controversy came about and people were protesting, okay? So that brings us to coal. There's different types of coal. It's very plentiful, but it's a very dirty fuel, okay? So it's burned in a lot of power plants, and it actually produces 45% of the world's electricity. So obviously this is a very important energy source. The largest coal-burning countries, first and foremost, is China, then US, and then India. So what this diagram from your book is showing you, again, there are different types of coal. There's different grades of coal. There's different qualities. Some provide more energy than others. Some are a little cleaner than others, but overall coal is a very dirty process. So this is just going into a coal generating plant. You don't have to know this by heart by any stretch of the imagination. But the take-home message here is there are quite a few power plants. The way they get their energy is strictly from coal. Okay. So when we talk about our fossil fuels, okay, 28% is within the U.S. within these reserves. Coal is the dirtiest of all the fossil fuels to burn. Okay, it has just this black soot, as we call it. It releases large amounts of carbon dioxide, and the ash that is released is highly toxic, and it includes mercury. And I think we talked about it in the past. I know Neville mentioned it, and I think Tony did as well, as far as, you know, mercury in our bodies and everything. This is one of the sources. So the coal reserves in the U.S., Russia, and China could last hundreds or even thousands of years. Okay, especially with technology, we can find more. But do we really want to utilize that source considering how dirty of a process it is? What this is showing you here is the carbon dioxide emissions in regards to percentages. Okay, so you can see that as far as carbon dioxide emissions, it's a very dirty process. There are trade-offs. I mean, there is plenty of it, so why don't we use it? Well, why don't we use it? Because of the pollution that takes place. Okay. We can convert solid coal to synthetic natural gas, and then there's also methanol or synthetic gasoline. Okay, so basically we can change the form of coal. It can be done. With these synthetic fuels, these man-made fuels essentially, it's lower air pollution than just using straight coal, so that's a good thing. Okay, again, we have a large amount of coal where we can make these synthetic fuels, but the disadvantage, it's not just low net energy, at least now it's low to medium, but it's not within the high range. And it requires mining 50% more coal. And when you do the mining, that's very intrusive. It's not like you can go make the land back the way it used to be. You have this huge pit, okay? So there's not much that can be done with that. You can't just leave the pit anymore due to environmental laws within mining, okay, SMARA, as we talked about on the field trip. But, you know, really, you're dealt with just this big pit. So another form of non-renewable energy is nuclear, okay? You don't have to know all the definite steps. I'm not all that good with the nuclear energy of it, part of it. There is a PowerPoint, not a PowerPoint, but a video from a past speaker that we've had, Tony Penna, and he's been in the nuclear energy industry. And so I encourage you to look at that and probably answer some questions that you wonder about nuclear energy. And as Tony Bonata pointed out, there's actually two different ways of doing nuclear energy. There was the fission, and then there's fusion. You can bring atoms together, or you can split the atoms apart, okay? But what we're striving for and what happens is there is this enormous amount of energy as a result, okay? So that's the pro to it. We get a lot of energy from this. And this was not necessarily nuclear plants per se were a hot topic within the last election, but what about nuclear plants was a hot topic? What is needed for the nuclear reactor? Water and the uranium. That whole, is there this uranium scandal, with Russia and all that sort of thing. So it is needed for the nuclear reactor is this uranium. And there's only uranium in certain parts of the world in mass quantities. So the thing is, when you have these nuclear reactors, okay, after 3 or 4 years in a reactor, the fuel rods are removed. So then they're removed, then what happens with them? They just don't disappear, where they go? Well, that's the whole thing, is where do they go? Okay, so let's keep on. Oh, here, mining uranium. Okay, a lot of times they, not always, but a good majority of them are along a water source. Okay, and we'll get into what's so important about that. So we have these high levels of radioactive waste. So then we got to figure out, where is it going? Because really it needs to be stored for a minimum of 10,000 years, looking at more like 250 million years before it's even considered to be safe. Okay, so that's where that whole NIMBY, what does NIMBY stand for? Not in my backyard. It's okay if it takes place, but not in my backyard. It's okay if all the solar takes place, but not in our, beautiful Mojave. Especially when it's not only taking up all the space, but when that solar is to supply LA, that's hundreds, over 100 miles away. Well, you want the electricity put up on your own buildings, right, Jorge?
Like launch into space.
What?
They launch rods into space.
Why don't they, or do they?
Why don't they?
I'm sure they've kind of considered it, but who knows? I mean, that no matter what route you take, there's a lot of cost involved. Obviously, if you're going to go that route, it would have to be unmanned, because I'm not going to be the one, flying that spacecraft out, because it's all contaminated now. So that it goes into that whole NIMBY. But even going into space, okay, I'm sure it's going to fall back down, meteorites and everything, it's still going to fall back down on Earth. So you got to take that in consideration. So basically what you have to do is bury it, and bury it deep. So where are we going to do that? So back in '87, the Department of Energy had this plan where they were going to, they thought, oh yeah, this is where I'm going to do it. And where they were going to do it is the Yucca Mountain Desert region in Nevada. Luckily, what happened was in 2010, it was denied. It didn't take place. The people there are like, not no, but hell no, we don't want that to happen here. Okay, I don't know where you're going to put it, but I don't want it here. Okay, the expense behind it was projected $96 billion. And the reason why, other than people, stating their opinion why they didn't want it there, was, it came back to the science of it. It really wasn't a good location due to all the rock fractures there. Okay? It wasn't a suitable location. So there are plants that do get decommissioned. This happened here in California, a nuclear plant. What nuclear plant was decommissioned? San Onofre. Okay? Within, I don't know how long ago, within the last 5 years or so, I believe? 2, yeah, very recent. So it was actually decommissioned. This does happen because they figured the amount of money that it was going to take in order to get it up to the standards it needed to be, in order to be safe, it was too much money involved. So they decommissioned it. So what you can do is you can dismantle the plant and safely store the radioactive materials. Okay, I use that term very loosely, safely store. What they can do possibly is put this huge physical barrier behind, kind of enclose that off, or they can literally put it in this tomb and monitor it for thousands of years.
100 feet from the present ocean, and the ocean's going to be
so what has happened is only 1% of electricity. Oh, Mr. Huffine, did you have a question?
Oh, I just said it's the proposed tomb is less than 100 feet from the ocean. It's up a considerable distance, but the ocean is slated to rise there immeasurably.
Yes. Yeah, San Onofre is right. It's right along the ocean there. And so, but that's how it cooled down. It took in that cool ocean water, and it was using that to cool down the plant. And that's why they're often, that's why they're built along some sort of water source, to cool down the plant. So with the nuclear power plants, there's no carbon dioxide emission. So that's kind of a plus. It generates a heck of a lot of electricity too. The downfall is now we have this radioactive material, and we have to try to figure out what to do with it. So we talked about this with fusion. This is where you fuse the nuclei together, okay? It releases an enormous amount of energy. In this case, it says no risk of meltdown or large radioactivity release. Let's see here. In 2006, the US, China, Russia, Japan, South Korea, and European Union. So what they are going to do is an experimental nuclear fusion reactor. And hopefully it'll be up and running, they're projecting by 2026. Again, very powerful, lots of energy from one source. Yet, this is the slowest energy field that's growing. Why is that? It's very expensive, okay? To build one of these nuclear plants is not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. Management, you have to effectively manage these plants, okay? There's those safety concerns, and rightfully so. Again, we have had problems here in the US too. Okay, you guys have heard of these other events that we'll get to, but there's been events here in the US with these nuclear reactors. So these possible solutions here, that, basically just how can we make it safer? And a lot of the ways to make it safer is just making sure that the maintenance is being done. That's usually what ends up happening more often, not when these nuclear reactors, these meltdowns and everything, is usually due to lack of maintenance. All right, let's keep going here. All right, so the trade-offs, okay, advantages. As far as emissions go, there's very little, okay? It emits 1/6 of the carbon dioxide as coal. So that's a good thing. But the disadvantages is just the overall cost and the possible harmful, effects that it has on the environment, therefore on us. So I downloaded this slide this morning, and it shows you where all the active, this is recent as of May of this year, so where all the active nuclear power plants are. You probably didn't realize there were so many in the US, okay? Most of them, as you can see, are on this side, not so much on this side. And what's interesting is I could have put another slide up there, a big red flag is they also have a slide that shows where these power plants are in conjunction with tornadoes. And that's kind of a scary thing. Okay, not too much here. And what's our concern along out here? Not tornadoes. I mean, we every now and then, kind of freaky, but there's those earthquakes, right? But over here, big problem is with their tornadoes. These two, basically, it's showing the same thing. America has the most number of nuclear reactors. Okay, this shows you easier as far as what those numbers are. There's 99 currently in the United States. So we have the most in the world. Second, followed by France. Then you have Japan. Okay, and you can see how it goes down. But this is more encompassing where you see more of the countries as far as nuclear reactors. So as far as who has the most, the United States does. So what you guys know about is what took place in Japan. Okay, Fukushima. What happened was, first and foremost, what caused it was that there was this major earthquake offshore. And anytime you have these major earthquakes offshore, as a result, you get tsunamis, these giant waves. Okay, so that's what happened. There was a large earthquake offshore Japan. In return, it caused the tsunami, and it hit Japan. But what also happened with that is all these here, they had protective walls, but now looking back on it, they weren't high enough, okay? There were flaws in the designing, okay, that exposed emergency cooling system controls and backup generators, they didn't work. Yeah, slow response to the crisis, they didn't act on it immediately. And then there was insufficient regulation and monitoring of the plant itself. So if all these were actually met, there still would have been a problem just because of the tsunami. But really what caused the problems was all the neglect, essentially, that was involved or not involved. So when we talk about nuclear, okay, there's some real serious long-term effects. There's also Chernobyl. This was before you guys were born, but there was also Chernobyl, and you can look at the documents from that. And because of the nuclear reactive material went into the water column, you know, babies are being born with serious defects if they were even born at all, because you know, women were having tons of miscarriages, people coming down with cancer and liver damage. I mean, it's just, and it continues this day, okay? So we're talking about long-term effects. How long-term? Nobody even really knows. That's the problem there. With current technologies, okay, disrupt the Earth's chemical cycles by emitting large quantities of pollutants and greenhouse gases. So we're disrupting these natural processes. Okay, we talked about that fracking. Really what fracking is it's kind of simulating, in a way, are these earthquakes. You hear about earthquakes now occurring in parts of the U.S. or the world that it's not known and shouldn't be happening, like Ohio. Ohio, you're supposed to have tornadoes. You're not supposed to have earthquakes, and yet they have that happening. And there's a lot of evidence pointing to that could possibly be a result of these fracking practices. Okay, so make sure you read over those. I don't mean to paint such a gloom and doom, okay? But it is what it is. We just need to do things smarter. We need the energy. We need heating. We have heating now, yay. But, you know, there's ways that we can go about it smarter. And despite what people might think and have said in the past, renewable energy really is the way to go. And we need to try to wean ourselves off of using as much of the natural gas, the oil and coal as much as possible. All right, Mr. Huffine, do you guys have any questions or comments?
Let me check.
Okay.
What's our plan for tomorrow?
We are going to do, hang on. We are going to do a lecture by Mr. Matt Howard on, we're going to go in, now we're on chapter 13, which is, chapter 13? Yeah, chapter 13, which is environmental hazards. So we'll be doing that.
What about the library?
Oh, and the library is coming to talk about research methods and library access and any help they need with that for their position papers or anything else.
Okay, would you like to address my class as to your expectations tomorrow for that?
Oh, yeah. So,
Neville, you want to get on the camera?
Sure. All right, you guys, so what we were, sorry, I'll just keep that for now. What we were talking about, good morning, by the way. Hope you're all doing well. Looking forward to Turkey. I am. What we were talking about in class here this morning is just, we've got 4 weeks left. And most of you, as far as I know, I haven't checked in the last couple of weeks, but first thing is check your grades. Expanded definitions, if you haven't done them, they've been graded in the last week, 10 days, and if you haven't done them, you get a 0. The good news is you can still do them. You have up to, and by the way, for this class as well on this end, you have 3 attempts. So even if you submitted them once before on time and you want to make them better, I noticed one score this morning that was really low. You resubmit them. You won't get dinged. You won't get that 10% deduction. If you didn't get it in on time, which has been quite a while ago now, then you're just going to get a 10% deduction. But the point I was making to these guys here, Mr. Huffine, is that this is kind of the effort part of the class. It's almost like the attendance. We can't grade people for attendance, but doing this is 100 points, just in expanded definitions. If they looked at how their expanded definitions were graded, they weren't graded based on how good we thought they are. They were graded on did they put in personal input and as much as we could tell, and did they actually do them according to the requirements. So you can catch up 100 points in a class that's now at 510 points, means that's 25, that is 20%. That's 2 grade points. So if you're getting a C, you can get an A. It's that simple, just by doing this expanded definitions. So we talked about that. Then we talked about Quiz 5A is closing tonight. So I know it's Thanksgiving weekend, but take care of that. Discussion board 3, which is again easy money. You just have to do it. And that closes next week. So you, while you're eating turkey, you're going to make sure you have to keep up with this stuff. Okay, and then finally, position papers. The bibliography, it's only four references. That's the absolute minimum number of references that you'll have for your paper. As we spoke to you guys in class not too long ago with Mr. Huffine, as you start doing your research, you're going to need many more than that probably if you're going to do a really good job. But it's 20 points. It needs to be submitted by tomorrow night at 11 p.m. And it's basically all we're going to be looking for is a couple of sentences on each one. So this is not a big project. You just need to get it done on time. If you don't do it by tomorrow night, then you will lose 5 points out of the 20. But you can still submit. Again, you can submit these things. I've generally said all these kind of projects to be, you can submit them at least 3 times. If you need to submit them more than that, please do. But don't submit half-done stuff because then it just makes extra grading for us, okay? All right, so I think that's the question. How about a question on nuclear power? Let me ask you guys on that side. How many of you think that nuclear power is a really good option? Cool. Could you give us a quick? I saw in the middle there. Thank you for taking the gap there. Just say your name and why you think it's important. The guy with the white cap on. Yeah. There. Yeah. Thank you. Give us your name, please.
Michael.
Hey, Michael, what do you like about nuclear power?
Oh, I don't like it.
Oh, you don't like it? Okay, why don't you like it?
Unsustainable, causes CO2 in the air and pollutes the air.
Does nuclear power pollute the air? It can. I mean, it does in disaster situations. But it's actually, my opinion is if we can deal with the nuclear waste, which actually is quite relatively simple to do. And Tony Penna, who you'll see his presentation is up there for you guys to view, the guest lecture. Please do that. I'm just going to tell you from here on out, the guest lectures, there will be a couple of questions on the final. We're going to update the final to include questions on the thing. So Tony Penna, in this section, the video is loaded. Little pointer on the video, so look at that and find out a little bit more about nuclear power. But he says that if we can deal with the waste, which we do have the technology to do that, then the technology for nuclear power is actually very sophisticated, and he thinks the risks outweigh the negatives. And I kind of feel that way as well, because we're not going to be able to do it all with renewables. They just can't work. They don't work during the day, and we don't know how to have batteries to store them. I mean, don't work at night. And so we're going to have backup. And so when we run out of fossil fuels, I think nuclear is going to have to be part of our arsenal. So that's my personal thing. But anyway, go ahead.